No period in religious history has people, Christians and non-Christians alike, questioning the validity of the Bible, as in the 21st century concerning the role of the Catholic Church regarding slavery and colonization. The Bible contains several passages referencing slavery, particularly in the Old Testament. Verses in books such as Leviticus and Exodus speak of the treatment of slaves and regulations surrounding servitude. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul writes about slavery in letters to early Christian communities. Some of these texts have been historically interpreted in ways that support the system of slavery. During the transatlantic slave trade, certain church leaders and theologians provided theological rationalizations for slavery. Some of these justifications referenced scriptural texts, including passages from the Old Testament, that condone slavery. The concept of natural slavery was also discussed in philosophical works, leading to a framework that accepted and perpetuated the practice. The Catholic Church played a significant role during the Age of Exploration and the subsequent colonization of the Americas, Africa, and other parts of the world. Missionary efforts were often intertwined with colonial activities, where the Church sought to convert indigenous populations to Christianity. While conversions were framed as an act of goodwill, they frequently coexisted with structures of oppression that supported the subjugation and exploitation of native peoples. The Church at times issued papal bulls that facilitated colonial endeavors or allowed for the practice of slavery. For instance, the papal bull Inter Caetera, issued by Pope Alexander VI in 1493, divided the New World for Spanish and Portuguese colonization and included the conversion of indigenous peoples as a justification. Since the abolition of slavery and the end of colonization, the Bible and the Church have come under heavy criticism and at some point even rejected based on these evil and inhumane treatments meted out to various groups of people. Is it practically and theologically possible to agree and believe these biblical passages that encouraged slavery were inspired by God? With the incessant outcry, contemporary theologians began to advocate for a historical critical approach to Scripture. They began to argue the importance of understanding the context in which these texts were written. According to them, slavery in biblical times was often different from the chattel slavery of the modern era, which was based on racial hierarchies and absolute ownership of individuals. By recognizing these differences, some argue that faith communities can move toward reinterpretation. The question remains, does this argument hold water? Absolutely no, because even the proponents of these arguments know that the word slavery and its interpretation in every context means the same in any historical period. Therefore, the argument by some church leaders advocating for education about the historical misuse of biblical texts and the existential commitment to human rights has no solid foundation. Acknowledging past injustices while encouraging a reinterpretation of Scripture that emphasizes love, justice, and equality only soothes the pain, but is not a complete solution. Contemporary moral standards and human rights considerations have challenged outdated interpretations of Scripture. The Church has been reconciling these texts with modern views on human dignity and the inherent rights of all individuals. The backlash of all these compelled Pope Francis to offer an apology regarding the Catholic Church's historical role in slavery and colonization, reflecting a broader acknowledgement within various religious communities about the implications of their historical actions and interpretations of sacred texts. Apologies, such as the one given by Pope Francis, serve as necessary steps toward healing and reconciliation. In the backdrop of all, can the Church revise the Bible? As for revising the Bible, the Catholic Church does not have a precedent for removing or altering biblical texts, given the sacred nature of Scripture in its tradition, it's argued. We would revisit such a stance in later discussions. Instead, the focus is usually on the interpretation and application of those texts in light of contemporary understandings. The Church encourages ongoing reflection and dialogue regarding scriptural passages and their implications. The journey toward reconciliation involves understanding historical injustices, reinterpreting sacred texts, and fostering ethical discussions that respond to modern sensibilities. While the texts that reference slavery will likely remain, how they are taught and understood can evolve, aligning with the Church's commitment to justice, dignity, and universal human rights. Addressing the historical consequences of these passages requires a complex interplay of theology, ethics, and social justice, striving to create a more equitable future.